I dream about your curvy body. The mountain man declared to the obese beggar, "Go on, move along, you fat beggar. You're scaring my customers." The shopkeeper barked, slamming his door in her face. Gracie Murphy flinched at the words, clutching her tin bowl as the wind cut through her torn shawl. Snow drifted around her boots, already soaked through. The whole of Copper Falls seemed to sneer, not out loud this time, but with the same look in every pair of eyes that passed her by. She'd been hungry for 2 days, cold for 2 months, and alone for far longer than that. Once she'd had a home. Once she'd been someone's daughter, someone's sister. But after her family lost everything, she became the one thing they couldn't afford, a useless mouth. So they sent her away, and the world took the hint. Now she sat beside a frozen trough, too weak to cry, watching her own breath disappear into the winter fog. The last bit of bread she'd begged for had gone stale days ago. Her fingers were blue, and that was when she heard boots. Heavy, measured, deliberate. A man stopped in front of her, tall, broad, wrapped in a coat of dark leather and fur. His beard was wild, his shoulders massive, but his eyes were soft, the color of chestnuts warmed by firelight. "Are you hungry, miss?" he asked. Gracie blinked, unsure if he was mocking her too. "Yes," she whispered, voice cracking. Without another word, he took off his gloves, placed a silver coin in her bowl, and said, "Then come with me." That was how Marcus Thornfield, the man the town called Bear of the Mountain, changed the course of her life forever. The bell over the diner door jingled as Marcus held it open. Warm air rushed out, carrying the scent of roasted beef, bread, and wood smoke. For Gracie, it felt like walking into heaven after weeks in the frozen streets. She hesitated, clutching the torn edge of her shawl, afraid that someone would throw her out before she even sat down. But Marcus's deep voice cut through the whispers. "She's with me." The townsfolk stared. The Bear of the Mountain rarely came down from his cabin, and when he did, it was never with company. Certainly not with a woman like her. Gracie could feel their eyes like needles on her back, but Marcus seemed not to notice or not to care. He guided her to a corner booth, his large hand steady on her shoulder. When the waitress arrived, looking puzzled, Marcus simply said, "The lady will have the roast dinner and an extra loaf of bread." Then, after pause, "And coffee. She needs it hot." Gracie's eyes widened. "That's too much," she whispered. I can't pay." "I didn't ask you to," he said, leaning back against the bench. "Eat." At first, she tried to be polite, small bites, careful sips, but hunger broke through pride. She ate with trembling hands, tears mixing with the steam from her coffee. Marcus didn't look away. He just watched her, quietly, as if committing her face to memory. Finally, when her plate was empty and her breathing evened, he said softly, "That's the first time I've seen you eat properly. I've watched you before, by the mercantile, near the stables. You always gave half your scraps to that stray dog." Gracie froze. "You've seen me?" Marcus nodded. "More than once. I don't sleep well. When I come down from the ridge for supplies, I look for you." She didn't know what to say. No one had ever looked for her, not since her family turned her away. "Why?" she asked finally. He smiled faintly, though his eyes softened. "Because you remind me of life before I lost mine." His words hung heavy between them. Marcus told her about his cabin on the mountain, about the hunting, the winters, the quiet, about how his wife had died 10 years before, and how, since then, the only voices he'd heard belonged to the wind and the wolves. "I thought I was meant to be alone," he said, his tone low, honest. "But lately I've been dreaming of you, of your face, of your laugh, of how you'd look sitting by the fire instead of in the cold." Gracie flushed crimson, unsure whether to laugh or run. "You're dreaming of me?" "I am," he said simply, "and if that offends you, I'll stop saying it. But I won't pretend it isn't true." She stared at him, stunned by the gentleness in his voice, the sincerity she'd never heard from any man before. For the first time, she didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel like the fat beggar. She felt seen. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and heavy. Marcus rose and placed a few coins on the counter. "You shouldn't spend another night on the street," he said. "Come with me. I have room, warmth, and food enough for two." Gracie looked up, fear and longing warring inside her. "Why me?" His answer came quietly, like an oath. "Because when I look at you, I don't see what they see. I see a woman built for the world the way it truly is, strong, warm, and real." Gracie hesitated before stepping into Marcus's wagon. The snow was falling thicker now, blanketing the streets in white silence. She wrapped her shawl tighter, but even through the cold she could feel the steady heat of his presence. Marcus climbed onto the driver's bench, flicked the reins, and the horses began their slow ascent toward the ridge. The road curved upward through dark pines, the town fading behind them until only the soft crunch of wheels on snow and the low murmur of the wind filled the air. Neither spoke for a long while. The quiet wasn't awkward. It felt like the kind of silence two people share when words would only break something delicate. Finally, Gracie whispered, "You really live all the way up here, alone?" Marcus nodded. "About an hour past the timberline, closest neighbors 10 miles away." "Doesn't it get lonely?" she asked. He smiled faintly beneath his beard. "Not as lonely as the town looks sometimes." Gracie turned to watch him, noticing the small scar that ran from his temple to his jaw, the roughness of his hands gripping the reins. He didn't seem like a dangerous man, but there was something untamed about him, like the mountain itself had shaped him in its image. At one point, the wagon hit a rut, jolting her forward. Marcus reached out instinctively, his hand catching her arm. For a brief second, her hand brushed his chest, solid, warm beneath the layers of wool. Their eyes met, and she quickly looked away, cheeks burning. "I'm sorry," she mumbled. He chuckled softly. "Don't be. I'd rather catch you than lose you in the snow." As the sky darkened, the wind grew harsher. Marcus stopped the horses near a grove and hopped down. "We'll rest here for a bit." He moved with quiet confidence, gathering kindling, striking flint, and coaxing a flame to life in minutes. The firelight flickered over his face, turning the shadows of his features gentle. He handed her a tin cup filled with broth from a small pot. "Drink. You'll feel warmer." Gracie took a sip. The taste, salty, rich, real, brought tears to her eyes. "You treat me as if I'm worth something," she said softly. Marcus looked at her from across the fire. "You are." She stared at the flames, unsure what to do with the ache rising in her chest. "People in town say I'm lazy, greedy, ugly. They say I'll die alone." Marcus leaned forward, his voice firm but calm. "Then they don't know what beauty is. They've lived too long in a world that confuses hunger for weakness and kindness for foolishness. For a long time, they just sat there, two broken souls thawing in the warmth of shared silence. When the fire began to fade, Marcus rose and built a small lean-to beside the wagon. "You'll sleep in here," he said. "It'll keep you dry. I'll keep watch." Gracie shook her head. "You've done enough already. You should rest too." He met her eyes, the firelight reflecting in them like molten gold. "I've rested for years, Gracie. That's all I ever did. I think I'd rather stay awake tonight." She lay down, wrapped in the blanket he'd given her, listening to the steady rhythm of his footsteps outside. Somewhere between the howling wind and the whisper of pine branches, she realized she wasn't afraid anymore. The mountain no longer seemed cruel. It felt alive, vast, ancient, and strangely welcoming. And for the first time in years, Gracie Murphy fell asleep, not to the sound of hunger, but to the soft, comforting murmur of a man's voice humming an old, forgotten song to keep the night away. When Gracie woke, the smell of coffee and wood smoke filled the air. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside coated in crystal white. She stepped from the wagon, her breath forming clouds in the morning light, and saw Marcus tending the fire with calm, steady hands. "We're almost home," he said, glancing up at her. "Cabin's just past that ridge." Home? The word felt foreign on her tongue. She hadn't had one since the day her father turned her out with nothing but a bundle of rags. They traveled another hour before the trees thinned and a clearing opened before them. The cabin stood sturdy and strong, built of thick pine logs with smoke curling from its stone chimney. The roof was heavy with snow, but it looked solid, welcoming, like it had been waiting just for her. Inside, it was warm and alive. The walls were lined with shelves of tools and books. Animal pelts hung by the door, and a large table stood near the fireplace, set with 2 tin plates. Gracie hesitated at the threshold, overwhelmed by the sense of safety. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Marcus shrugged as if embarrassed. "It does the job. You'll have the small room in back. It's not much, but it's warm." He showed her where to hang her coat, where to find the kettle and flour, how to tend the stove. His manner was practical, not commanding, as though he wanted her to feel that this place was partly hers already. Over the next few days, a rhythm formed between them. Marcus would rise before dawn, splitting wood or checking his traps, while Gracie cooked breakfast, simple meals of cornbread, beans, and coffee. He insisted she sit first and eat while the food was still hot. One morning, she protested, "I can wait until you're done." He shook his head. "A man who eats first forgets his manners, and I've been alone too long to lose them now." She smiled for the first time in months, a real unguarded smile that softened her entire face. Marcus noticed but said nothing, only felt something shift quietly in his chest. Gracie worked harder than she thought she could. She cleaned, mended clothes, and even learned to chop wood, though her first swing missed completely and buried the axe in the frozen ground. Marcus laughed, a deep, rumbling sound she hadn't heard before. "Here," he said, stepping behind her. His large hands closed gently around hers on the axe handle. "Swing from your shoulders, not your arms. Let the weight do the work." She could feel the warmth of his body through her shawl, his breath near her ear. For a moment, time froze, the mountain silent, her heart loud. When the axe finally came down clean through the log, she turned and found him smiling at her. "See?" he said. "Strong as any man?" She blushed. "Maybe not quite." Stronger, he corrected. You're still here after everything. As the days passed, Marcus began leaving small things for her. A hand-carved spoon on the table, a new shawl folded neatly by the bed, a jar of honey he'd traded for in town. Each gift was wordless but full of meaning. In return, Gracie baked for him, something she hadn't done since childhood. The first batch of biscuits burned black, but Marcus ate them anyway. "Perfect," he declared, crumbs clinging to his beard. She laughed until tears filled her eyes, the sound echoing off the cabin walls like music. One night, as snow fell thick outside, the wind howled against the shutters. The firelight painted their faces gold. Marcus sat sharpening his knife while Gracie mended his torn shirt. The silence between them felt easy, intimate. "Marcus," she said softly, "why did you help me that day in town?" He paused, staring into the flames. "Because you looked at me," he said simply. "Everyone else looks through me like I'm some wild thing. But you saw me." Gracie set down the shirt, her throat tightening. "That's how I felt when you spoke to me," she whispered, "like I wasn't invisible anymore." He looked up then, and their eyes met, a gaze so quiet and deep it said everything words couldn't. The fire popped, and outside the snow fell heavier, wrapping the world in silence. Inside the cabin, two lonely souls sat closer than they ever had before, their hearts finding warmth that no winter could ever take away. By spring, the snow around the cabin had melted into streams that glittered under the sun. The woods came alive again, birds calling from the pines, wildflowers pushing through the thawing ground. For the first time in years, Marcus smiled easily. Gracie filled the silence of the mountains with laughter, and the home that once echoed with ghosts now carried the sound of life. But peace on the mountain never lasts long. One morning, while airing out a trunk she found in the storage shed, Gracie uncovered a faded envelope marked Murphy. Her breath caught. The handwriting was her father's, jagged and heavy, the kind she hadn't seen since the day he cast her out. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. Inside was a letter dated 2 years prior, addressed to a man named Sheriff Colton Reeves. It accused Gracie of stealing from her family before running away, and worse, it authorized the sheriff to take her into custody and recover any property she might have hidden. Tears blurred the words. Her father hadn't just abandoned her. He'd tried to have her arrested. That evening, Marcus returned from the woods to find her staring into the fire, the letter clutched in her hands. "What's wrong, Gracie?" She told him everything, how she'd found the letter, what it said, how she feared the sheriff might still come for her. Marcus listened in silence, his expression darkening like a storm brewing behind calm eyes. "I should have burned this town to the ground when I had the chance," he muttered, pacing the floor. "Marcus," she began gently. He stopped. "They hurt you once. They won't do it again." But her fear wasn't for herself. "If they come, they'll hurt you too. You've already done so much for me." Marcus knelt beside her, his rough hands cupping her face. "Gracie," he said quietly, "there's nothing they can take that I'm not willing to give for you." For a moment, she forgot the letter, the world, everything, until the sound of hoofbeats shattered the stillness outside. 2 riders appeared at the edge of the clearing, one wearing the silver star of a sheriff. The other was her brother, Thomas Murphy. Marcus's jaw tightened. "Stay inside," he ordered. He stepped onto the porch as the men dismounted. Sheriff Reeves lifted his hat. "Marcus Thornfield, been a while since anyone saw you down in Copper Falls. I hear you're keeping company with a woman who doesn't belong here." Marcus's hand hovered near the revolver on his hip. "She belongs wherever she chooses," Thomas sneered. "She's a thief and a liar. She stole from our father and ran off with his money. I've come to bring her home." Inside, Gracie pressed a hand to her mouth to keep from crying out. Marcus's voice dropped low, dangerous. "Your father sold his soul long before he lost his daughter. You've got 5 seconds to turn that horse around." Reeves shifted uneasily. He knew Marcus's reputation, the hunter who once tracked 3 outlaws through a blizzard and brought them back alive. But Thomas, full of arrogance and whiskey courage, spat into the snow. "You won't shoot me, mountain man, not in front of the law." Marcus didn't answer. The silence stretched until even the birds stopped singing. Then he said, "You're right, I won't." The door behind him creaked open. Gracie stepped out, her face pale but determined. "Thomas, I didn't steal anything. Father lied. He always lied. All I ever wanted was a place where I wasn't ashamed to exist." Her brother hesitated, thrown off by the steadiness in her voice. "You think this brute's gonna save you?" Marcus stepped closer, his shadow falling across Thomas. "She doesn't need saving. She's already home." For a long, breathless moment, no one moved. Then Sheriff Reeves exhaled. "Let it go, Thomas. The law's got no claim here." Thomas swore under his breath, yanked his reins, and turned his horse. Snow sprayed as they disappeared down the trail. When the sound of hoofbeats faded, Gracie finally sagged against Marcus. He held her, saying nothing, only brushing his thumb across her cheek where a tear had frozen. "You don't ever have to hide again," he murmured, "not while I'm breathing." And though danger had passed, the truth hung between them like smoke. Her family's betrayal, his past violence, the fragility of the peace they'd built. Both knew the mountain wasn't done testing them. The peace that followed was fragile, too quiet, too still, like the air before a storm. Marcus knew it. Gracie felt it. And when the storm finally came, it didn't arrive with thunder. It came with fire. 3 nights after the sheriff's visit, Marcus woke to the scent of smoke. Outside, the forest glowed red. Flames clawed at the trees, racing downhill toward the cabin. For a moment, he thought lightning had struck, until he saw figures moving through the haze. Men with torches. "Thomas," Marcus growled under his breath. Gracie stirred, coughing. "Marcus, what's happening?" "Stay inside," he ordered. "Don't come out unless I call." But Gracie refused. "If this is about me, I won't hide any more." He looked at her. That same woman he'd found half frozen in the street months ago, now standing in her nightdress, eyes fierce and unyielding. Something in him broke and healed at once. "Then stay close," he said, grabbing his rifle. The door burst open as Thomas Murphy and 2 men stepped through the smoke. "You should have let her go, Thornfield," Thomas shouted, raising his pistol. "Father was right. She's nothing but trouble." Marcus stepped in front of Gracie. "You'll leave her out of this." "Not until she signs the deed," Thomas snapped, waving a crumpled piece of paper. "That cabin sits on our land." Gracie's voice rang out, trembling but strong. "That's a lie. You sold it years ago to pay for your drinking." Thomas's face twisted. "Then I'll burn it down instead." He threw his torch. The wall caught instantly. Marcus lunged, tackling Thomas into the snow. The 2 men wrestled, fists and fury flying. Thomas fired once, the shot tearing through Marcus's shoulder. Gracie screamed, grabbing the fallen rifle. Her hand shook, but her voice didn't. "Stop, Thomas, please!" He laughed through bloody teeth. "You won't shoot me." Gracie's eyes filled with tears. "You're right," she said softly, "but I'll never let you hurt anyone again." Behind her, the flames roared higher. Marcus staggered to his feet, blood staining the snow. He seized Thomas by the collar and threw him backward hard, into the riverbank where the fire couldn't reach. "Go," Marcus warned, his voice low and final, "and don't ever come back." Thomas hesitated, hatred and fear warring in his eyes, then turned and fled into the burning woods. Marcus swayed, nearly collapsing. Gracie rushed to him, pressing her hands to his wound. "Hold on," she whispered desperately. "Please, hold on." "I told you," he gasped, a faint smile on his lips. "You never had to hide." They stumbled back into the cabin, dragging water from the trough, beating at the flames until dawn broke. By morning, the fire was out, the forest blackened, but the cabin still standing. Marcus lay pale but breathing. Gracie knelt beside him, soot and tears streaking her cheeks. "You saved me again," she said. He opened his eyes just enough to whisper, "No, Gracie, you saved me first." Weeks passed before the mountain turned green again. The fire had scarred the hillsides, but spring still came, tender shoots pushing through the ash, the same way love had found its way through Gracie's pain. Marcus's shoulder healed slowly. He could no longer lift the heavy iron tools the way he once did, so Gracie took over much of the work. She learned how to shoe horses, mend hinges, and temper metal under his careful guidance. Each day their rhythm grew stronger, steadier, like the beating of a single heart shared between them. One evening, the sun sank behind the ridge, painting the cabin in gold. Marcus sat by the window, his arm around Gracie. Outside, the last remnants of snow glowed like silver dust. "I still can't believe it," she whispered, "that I belong somewhere." Marcus turned to her, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "You always belonged. You just needed someone to remind you." The fire in the hearth crackled softly, warm and alive. For the first time in years, Gracie didn't feel ashamed of her reflection in the window. She saw what Marcus saw, a woman who had survived, who had fought, who had become her own kind of beautiful. He took her hand, rough and scarred like his own. "You're safe here, Gracie. It's your home now, if you'll have it." Her eyes filled with tears, the same kind that fall when pain finally lets go. She leaned her head against his chest, listening to the heartbeat that had once called her out of the cold. Outside, the wind howled gently through the pines, not a warning this time, but a lullaby. And somewhere in that endless wilderness, their love burned quietly, stronger than the fire that once tried to destroy it. Every story like Gracie's reminds us that love isn't about perfection. It's about being seen, truly seen, for who we are beneath the scars, the weight, the mistakes, and the fear. Marcus didn't save her because she was broken. He loved her because she was real, because she had survived. If you've ever felt invisible, remember this. Somewhere out there, someone is dreaming about your light, your laughter, your shape, your soul. Wherever you're listening from tonight, believe this one thing: you are enough. If you still believe in love, don't scroll away. The next story is waiting for you.